If the Gestapo had your wife, your men, and your secrets, what would you do? In 1943, one French resistance leader faced exactly that choice. What he decided next got him labeled a Nazi collaborator, cost him his life, and sent his innocent wife to her death. But was he truly a traitor, or a man with no good options left? The 6th of June 1944. Dawn breaks over Normandy. Allied battleships hammer German bunkers. Paratroopers drop into darkness. By nightfall, over 100,000 soldiers are ashore. Across France, radios crackle. Coded messages from London. The resistance has waited 4 years for this moment. Cut the rails. Block the roads. Rise. But in Bordeaux, in the southwest, there is no celebration. There is only whispered anger. Because 6 months earlier, the resistance here didn't just lose a battle. It lost everything. Arms, safe houses, names, lives. And the man responsible wasn't a German officer. He was one of their own. His name was André Grandclément. André Grandclément was born in 1,909 inches. Rochefort, southwestern France. His father was an admiral. His mother came from old military stock. He grew up in order and discipline. Paris, Beirut, Tunis, wherever the French Navy sent his father, the family followed. He studied law, married young, had 5 children, though 3 died in infancy. Only 2 daughters survived. In 1934, a riding accident and illness ended his military career before it really began. He became an insurance broker in Bordeaux, built a business, started over. Then, in 1939, the war came. Germany invaded Poland. France mobilized. Grandclément, once declared unfit for service, was called back. He fought in the Ardennes in 1940. He was decorated for bravery. Then, France collapsed. By June, it was over. The armistice was signed. Half of France occupied. The other half ruled by Marshal Pétain from Vichy. At first, Grandclément supported Pétain. He hated communists. He admired discipline. He thought the old marshal might restore order. But occupation changed his mind fast. By 1941, Grandclément had made his choice. He joined the resistance, not the communists. He still hated them. He joined a right-wing network called the Organisation Civile et Militaire, OCM. Patriots, nationalists, men like him. He took the code name Bernard, and he was good at it. Within a year, he was running operations across the entire southwest, Poitiers to Bayonne, Bordeaux at the center. He recruited fighters, mapped drop zones for British planes, stored weapons in barns and cellars, set up training camps in the forests, built escape lines to Spain. In January 1943, he married Lucette Tartas. She was a resistance fighter too, young, loyal, devoted to the cause. That same year, he made contact with the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, the shadow organization that armed and trained resistance networks across Europe. With SOE backing, his network exploded. Dozens of drop zones, hundreds of fighters, tons of weapons and explosives hidden across the region. For a moment, it looked unstoppable, but the Germans were hunting. 1943 was the year the Gestapo tore the French resistance apart, not through battle, through patience, informants, radio detection, raids at dawn. In Paris, a major network fell. Files were seized, files that should never have existed, lists of names, addresses, code words. The Germans followed the threads south. Arrests in Bordeaux, safe houses raided, fighters disappearing overnight. Grandclément went into hiding. He moved constantly, changed locations, avoided patterns. But then the Gestapo took Lucette, his wife, his partner, locked in a cell in Bordeaux. He wanted to turn himself in, exchange himself for her. His men told him no. You know too much. You're too important. If you fall, the whole network falls. So he kept running, Until September 1943, a café in Paris. Someone recognized him. The Gestapo arrested him on the spot. He was taken back to Bordeaux, to the man who had been hunting him for months, Friedrich Doss. Gestapo intelligence officer, fluent in French, polite, methodical, deadly, and he already knew everything. Doss didn't torture Grandclément. He didn't need to. He laid files on the table. Names, addresses, drop zones, radio frequencies. Your network is already broken, he said. We know who you work with. We know where the weapons are. We know what London tells you. Grandclément realized it was true. The Germans had been inside his operation for weeks. Then Doss made an offer. Surrender part of your weapons. Call off the attacks. In exchange, we release 100 prisoners, including your wife. But there was more. Doss knew Grandclément hated communists. He played on it. When the war ends, he said, the real threat won't be Germany. It will be the communists in your own resistance. They'll take over France, unless men like you are still armed, still organized. So, we make a deal. You give us enough to keep the peace, now. We let your men go. And when we leave, you'll have the strength to fight the Reds. It was a trap, a clever one. It turned fear of Germany into fear of France's own future. Grandclément asked for time. Doss gave him conditional freedom to discuss it with his network. He met his commanders. Some listened. Most refused. One nearly shot him on the spot. But Grandclément took the deal anyway. 45 tons of weapons, explosives, radios, ammunition, hidden in barns and forests across the southwest. Grandclément handed over about a third of it. In return, the Gestapo released around 100 prisoners, Lucette among them. Planned arrests were cancelled. Some said he saved lives. Others said he destroyed the resistance, because the damage didn't stop there. The Germans used what they learned. They didn't just take the weapons. They used the information to map the entire network. Arrests followed. Interrogations. Executions. Safe houses became traps. Couriers disappeared. Fighters went silent. The Bordeaux resistance, once one of the strongest in France, was gutted. And Grandclément became a double agent, working with the Gestapo, identifying communists in the resistance. Pointing the Germans toward targets he considered dangerous. He believed he was protecting France's future. His former comrades believed he had sold them out. By early 1944, the word spread. In London, the Free French forces sent a coded radio message. It named Grandclément as a traitor, a collaborator, responsible for the deaths of resistance fighters. But he still had allies, people who believed he had been trapped, that he had made an impossible choice. They hid him and Lucette near the Atlantic coast. At Pilat-sur-Mer, he wrote a long letter, a defense. He wanted to go to London, to explain himself to General de Gaulle, to clear his name. Then the Allies landed in Normandy. By July 1944, the Germans were retreating. The resistance was rising again. New drops from London, new recruits fleeing forced labor. The Southwest was waking up. But the memory of Grandclément's betrayal hadn't faded. If anything, it burned hotter. SOE agents in Bordeaux received orders, not from the Germans, from London. Bring Grandclément in. They contacted him, told him a plane was ready, that he could fly to England, present his case to de Gaulle, defend himself in person. He believed them. He agreed to go, took Lucette with him, and his bodyguard, Marc Duleguay. They were driven to what they thought was an airfield. It wasn't. It was a hidden resistance camp, deep in the woods. They were taken inside, disarmed, questioned. This wasn't an evacuation, it was a tribunal. The resistance fighters asked him about the deal, about the weapons, about the names he gave the Gestapo. Grandclément defended himself. He said he had saved lives, that the Germans already knew most of what he told them, that he had redirected their attention toward communists, the real enemy. His judges didn't agree. They believed the weapons he surrendered had crippled the resistance, that the information he gave had led to arrests, torture, and executions, that his fear of communists had blinded him to the greater evil. On the 27th of July, 1944, one day before his 35th birthday, they sentenced him to death. The sentence was carried out immediately. André Grandclément was shot in the forest. So was his bodyguard, Marc Duluguet. And so was Lucette. She had opposed her husband's deal with the Gestapo. She had argued against it. She had stayed loyal to the resistance, even after he turned. But she was executed anyway. Some said it was because she knew too much. Others said it was revenge, a message. The resistance didn't explain. In early August, the Gestapo retaliated. They executed 50 prisoners in response to Grandclément's death. 50 lives. For the man who had tried to save 100. The math didn't add up. It never does in war. So what was André Grandclément? A traitor who destroyed the resistance to save his wife? A pragmatist who made a brutal calculation in an impossible situation? A man who feared communists more than he feared Nazis? Or all three? The resistance called him a collaborator. The Gestapo mourned him as an asset. His wife died beside him, punished for his choices. History doesn't give easy answers. And maybe that's the point. Because the hardest question isn't what Grandclément did, it's what you would have done in his place. Grandclément's execution didn't end the debate. It started it. After the liberation, France went through a brutal reckoning. Thousands accused of collaboration were executed. Some guilty, some not. The line between resistance and collaboration was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. And Grandclément wasn't the only one who made deals. Across France, resistance leaders negotiated with the Gestapo, some to buy time, some to save prisoners, some to survive. Most of them were never caught. So here's the question no one wants to ask. How many other André Grandclément were there? And how many of them are still called heroes? Grandclément's execution didn't end the debate. It started it. After the liberation, France went through a brutal reckoning. Thousands accused of collaboration were executed. Some guilty, some not. The line between resistance and collaboration was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. And Grandclément wasn't the only one who made deals. Across France, resistance leaders negotiated with the Gestapo, some to buy time, some to save prisoners, some to survive. Most of them were never caught. So, here's the question no one wants to ask. How many other André Grandclément were there? And how many of them are still called heroes? When France was liberated in 1944, the celebrations didn't last long. Almost immediately, a wave of violence swept the country. It was called the Épuration Sauvage, the Wild Purge. People accused of collaboration were dragged into the streets. Some were beaten. Some were shot on the spot. Women who had relationships with German soldiers had their heads shaved in public squares while crowds jeered. No trials, no evidence, just rage. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 people were killed in the months after liberation. Most were executed by resistance fighters or local militias. Many were guilty, many were not. The official purge came later. Trials, tribunals, legal proceedings. Over 120,000 cases were opened. Around 97,000 were convicted. About 1,500 were executed after trial. But here's the thing. The criteria for collaboration were vague. Selling food to Germans could get you arrested. Serving in the Vichy police could get you shot. But high-ranking Vichy officials who switched sides at the right moment often walked free. It wasn't about justice. It was about timing, about who had power when the music stopped. And in that chaos, Grandclément became a symbol, not of guilt, but of ambiguity, because his story asked a question that made people uncomfortable. What counts as betrayal when everyone is compromised? Friedrich Doss, the man who turned Grandclément, was never punished. After the war, he returned to Germany. He lived quietly. died in 2000 at the age of 88. He never faced trial. In interviews years later, he spoke about his work in Bordeaux with something close to pride. He said he had been good at his job, that he understood the French, that he knew how to find their pressure points, and he did. The deal he offered Grandclément wasn't unique. The Gestapo used the same tactic across Europe. Offer a resistance leader a choice. Sacrifice some to save others. Trade arms for lives. Play on their fears, their love for family, their hatred of rival factions. It worked more often than anyone wants to admit. In Belgium, resistance leaders handed over weapon caches in exchange for prisoner releases. In the Netherlands, networks collapsed after similar deals. In Poland, the Home Army fought the Nazis and the Communists at the same time, sometimes with German encouragement. The Gestapo didn't need to break everyone. They just needed to break enough. And once the trust was gone, the network fell apart on its own. That's what happened in Bordeaux. Even after Grandclément's execution, the damage lingered. Fighters didn't trust each other. Operations stalled. When D-Day came, the Southwest resistance was nowhere near as effective as it should have been. Not because of German strength, because of broken trust. Those understood something most people miss. You don't destroy a resistance by fighting it. You destroy it by making it fight itself. Of all the people killed in that forest on the 27th of July 1944, Lucette Grandclément's death might be the most haunting. She had joined the resistance before she met André. She believed in the cause. She married him in 1943, at the height of his work with SOE. When he made the deal with DOS, she opposed it, openly. She told him it was wrong, that it would destroy everything they had built, but she stayed with him. Some say it was loyalty. Others say it was love. Maybe it was both. When the resistance took them to the forest, she knew what was coming. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She stood beside her husband and waited. The men who executed her justified it later. They said she knew too much, that releasing her would have been a security risk, that she might have talked. But others believed it was simpler than that. She was his wife, and guilt, by association, was enough. Her execution became a symbol of how far the purge had gone, how the need for justice had twisted into something darker. Because if Lucette Grandclément, who opposed the deal and stayed loyal to the resistance, could be killed, then no one was safe. Here's where it gets complicated. Was Grandclément wrong to take the deal? On paper, yes. He gave the Germans weapons. He gave them information. People died because of it. But let's walk through his options. Option 1. Refuse the deal. The Gestapo already knows most of your network. They already have the names. Lucette stays in prison. 100 other prisoners stay in prison. The weapons stay hidden, but the network is broken anyway. Option 2. Take the deal. Trade a third of your weapons for 100 lives. Hope that when the Allies land, you'll still have enough men and arms to fight. Redirect German attention toward the Communists, who you believe are a long-term threat to France. Neither option is good, but one of them saves lives in the short term. Grandclément chose that one, and it destroyed him. Because the resistance couldn't afford moral ambiguity. It needed heroes and villains. Clarity, certainty. Grandclément offered them complexity, and they killed him for it. The historian Robert Gildea, who studied collaboration and resistance in France, wrote something striking. He said that the difference between a hero and a traitor in occupied France often came down to a single decision made under unbearable pressure. And most people never had to make that decision. The ones who did rarely came out clean. There's another layer to this story, one that often gets ignored. Grandclément hated communists. That wasn't unusual. A lot of French resistance fighters did. The French Communist Party had opposed the war in 1939 because of the Hitler-Stalin Pact. They only joined the resistance after Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. Many right-wing resistors saw them as opportunists, as a future threat. Grandclément believed that after the war, France would face a communist takeover. that the resistance would fracture along political lines, that the real battle would come after liberation months before. He wasn't entirely wrong. In 1944 and 1945, there were serious fears that the French communists, armed and organized, would try to seize power. In some regions, they did. Local communist militias set up parallel governments, enforced their own laws, settled scores. It didn't lead to a revolution. De Gaulle consolidated power. The communists were brought into the political system. But the tension was real. So when Grandclément made his deal with Dose, he wasn't just thinking about the Germans, he was thinking about what came after. He believed he was playing a longer game. But the resistance didn't see it that way. They saw a man who had chosen ideology over unity, who had sided with the enemy to fight his own people. And maybe they were right. Or maybe Grandclément saw something they didn't want to admit, that the enemy wasn't just outside France. It was inside too. In early August 1944, the Gestapo executed 50 prisoners in retaliation for Grandclément's death. 50 people who had nothing to do with his execution. 50 people who were in cells because of the very network he had tried to save. The Germans didn't announce why they did it. They didn't need to. The message was clear. You killed our asset, so we kill yours. It's impossible to know if those 50 would have survived anyway. The Gestapo executed thousands in the final months of occupation. Prisoners were liabilities, witnesses, loose ends, but the timing is hard to ignore. Grandclément's deal had saved 100 prisoners. His death cost 50 more. Did the math work out? Did his choices save more lives than they cost? No one can say for sure, because every life he saved had a name, a family, a story. And so did every life lost because of him. Moral calculus doesn't work in war. The numbers never add up clean. So here's what we're left with. André Grandclément built one of the most effective resistance networks in France. He worked with British intelligence. He trained hundreds of fighters. He hid tons of weapons. Then he made a deal with the Gestapo. He gave up arms. He gave up information. He became a double agent. He said he did it to save lives, to preserve strength for the real fight ahead. His enemies said he did it to save himself, to protect his wife, to settle scores with communists. Maybe all of it is true. The resistance executed him without a real trial. His wife died beside him, despite opposing his choices. The Gestapo killed 50 more in revenge. And after the liberation, France tried to forget him. He doesn't appear in the monuments. He's not in the textbooks. His name is barely mentioned in histories of the resistance, because his story doesn't fit the narrative. He's not a hero, but he's not a simple villain either. He's the uncomfortable middle, the place where ideology meets desperation, where principles meet survival, and no one wants to talk about that. But here's the thing. Most of occupied France lived in that middle. Most people made compromises. Small ones, big ones. They kept their heads down. They did what they had to do. Very few were pure resistors. Very few were pure collaborators. Most were something in between. Grandclément just made his compromises louder, more visible, more consequential, and he paid for it. The final question. So let's go back to the beginning. If the Gestapo had your wife, your men, and your secrets, what would you do? Would you hold the line? Let them all die to protect the mission? Or would you make the deal? Trade some to save others? Live with the consequences? It's easy to answer when it's hypothetical. But Grandclément didn't get a hypothetical. He got a room, a Gestapo officer, a file full of names, and a choice. Maybe he chose wrong. Maybe there was no right choice. Maybe the real tragedy is that we'll never know, because the people who judged him never had to make the same choice. And the people who did make that choice are mostly silent or dead. So here's the last thing. Grandclément's story isn't just about France. It's not just about World War II. It's about what happens when good people are put in impossible situations, when every option leads to harm, when morality becomes a luxury you can't afford. It's about the fact that history is written by the survivors, and the survivors don't always tell the whole truth, because the truth is messy, uncomfortable, human. And maybe that's the real reason we don't talk about André Grandclément, not because he was a traitor, but because his story forces us to ask a question we don't want to answer. How many other people made the same choice? And how many of them are still called heroes?